Friends, I am Naresh Dadhich. Today I am going to discuss briefly a book written by me and published recently in 2019 by Rawat publication, that is called Contemporary Political Theory. Okay. Now this book is important in many ways, because in this book I have dealt with contemporary political theory as it has emerged, especially after John Rawls' theory was published in 1971. So I have systematized and wrote chapters on different important stream of contemporary political thought. Like for instance, I begin with political theory, how we define it, how we distinguish it from political philosophy and political thought, what are the approaches to study political theory and others. Then first chapter is about traditionalism, that is those thinkers who were active during the period of empirical political theory, when empirical political theory or scientific political theory was at its peak, that is from Second World War to 1970. So during this time we have some very important thinkers like Hannah Arendt, we know that, and so I have dealt with Hannah Arendt as well as Eric Voegelin. Then we have very important British thinker Michael Oxford. Then I have dealt with citizenship theory. We know that in 1949 Marshall has written a very classic essay on liberal theory of citizenship, and that became a classical basis for discussion of citizenship theory. After that, citizenship theory is changed, especially after globalization. The citizenship theory is under too much changes. So I have discussed all these changes, what has happened in citizenship theory, beginning with Marshall's essay. Then we have liberal egalitarianism. We know that John Rawls' philosophy is considered as the mainstream liberalism of today, and that is called liberal egalitarianism. Another thinker who is part of this is Brian Barry. And so these two thinkers, especially Rawls in theory of justice, is elaborately dealt with in this chapter. Then we have libertarianism. We know that Robert Nozick, who was a colleague of John Rawls, wrote in 1974 Anarchy, State and Utopia, criticizing Rawlsian theory that it is too selfish and too individualistic. Not individualistic, but too community oriented. So he says, Robert Nozick says that our theory is today's version of classical liberal political theory. And so libertarianism has many variations also, but those who are important I have mentioned in this book. Like for instance, I have talked about Robert Nozick's entitlement theory as well as his criticism, then Friedrich Hayek and other thinkers. Then we have chapter on communitarianism. Communitarianism, as we know, is the most vocal critique of John Rawls, and there are very important thinkers who are part of communitarians, and their argument is that individual cannot be defined apart from his membership of a community. So there are some important thinkers like Michael Sandel, Michael Walzer, Alasdair MacIntyre, Charles Taylor, Amitai Etzioni, and others. And I have talked about the important issues before communitarianism and how communitarianism became an important political philosophy in 1990s. And later on, communitarianism was considered as a corrective political philosophy of liberalism. So most of the important elements of communitarianism has now been adopted in liberal political theory. Then we have democratic theory. As we know that democracy today is the most important political ideology and political system. There are various theories of democracy, and there are various forms of democracy which are important today. One of them is deliberative democracy, and I have given enough space to describe what is deliberative democracy. Then we have Marxist theory. It is wrong to assume that with the decline of communism, Marxist theory is also declined. No, there are various important interpreters of Marx who are given new inputs in Marxist theory and making it more and more relevant. Like we have now structural Marxism, analytical Marxism, or many other types of Marxism. And I have tried to briefly introduce different Marxists. Like we can talk of Habermas, we can also talk of some other like critical theorist Herbert Marcuse, and we can also talk of some other thinkers like, for instance, Louis Althusser, and then Cohen's Karl Marx's theory of history and defense, which is a classic case of a reinterpretation of Karl Marx. And then we have some very important 1980s books by John Elster and Adam Przeworski. They talk about different interpretation of Karl Marx, as well as Roemer's general theory of exploitation and class. Then the next chapter is about multiculturalism. We know multiculturalism became very important after the decline of Soviet Union, when ethnicity became important in political theory, and people wanted to establish a state on the basis of ethnicity. So to prevent this disintegration of states, multiculturalism became an important aspect of liberal theory. Although some say that it is not compatible with liberalism, but many others say that it is compatible with liberalism, or even it is part of liberalism. We have a very important thinker of multiculturalism, that is, as we know, a Canadian philosopher who has dealt with multiculturalism in a very lucid manner, that is Will Kimilka. He is the forerunner of this multiculturalism. We also have Bhiku Parekh, who talks about multiculturalism, and Taylor of Canada, who also talks about multiculturalism. Then we have feminism or gender studies. We know now we talk of the first wave of feminism and second wave and third wave, and now people are talking about the fourth wave. And now feminism is considered as more of the part of gender studies in general, where not only female sex but transgenders also are part of its discussion or discourse, LGBT what we call. So this is very important political theory which has emerged in the 80s and 90s and is still going strong in one way. Then we have ecology and green political theory. As we know, with the rise of industrialization and spread of industrialization, the problem of environment became very important. And there are some thinkers who devoted their time and energy in explaining the man-nature relationship. And they tried to argue out that if the developmental model which is given by capitalism, that to conquer nature will continue, then we will be in trouble. And so what we should do is to go with nature and not against nature. And there are some very important studies which have been given in this. There was a report of the Limits of Growth report in 1972, which made the basis of this ecology or environmentalism. And there are many thinkers or important philosophers who have given importance to this ecology aspect. Dobson, for instance, talks about it. Arne Naess talks about it. Then we have globalization. We know globalization is a very important segment of development in the world economy, but it also had some repercussion on politics and culture and other aspects. So after 1991, with the decline of Soviet Union, globalization becomes a world phenomenon. So what are the features of globalization, how it affects the different stream of society that I have dealt with. And now after 2016 almost, we have another protectionism which is rising up with the election of Donald Trump, and in Britain also with Brexit. So the arguments given by protectionists against globalization is also taken care of. But we should understand what is globalization, because some say that globalization is beneficial for everybody, and others say no, it is not beneficial. There are some, it is only making rich more rich and making poor more poor, something like that. So, but I have given all the arguments and statistics also to justify certain arguments. Okay, then we have postmodernism. As we know that we are living in an era of postmodernism. It is defined in a very different way, because postmodernism and postmodernity, these are two different things. Then in cultural studies it is defined in a different way, and the beginning of postmodernism is also disputable in different disciplines. So in political science we say that it started in about 1970s, 1970, 78, when a French philosopher wrote a very important book called, that is given by Lyotard. In 1978 he wrote an important book, and from there the social sciences has adopted postmodernism as an important philosophical phase of its development. Then in the last we have some important political concepts like end of ideology, end of history, civil society, and post-colonialism and others. So this is a book which is a textbook in one sense. Now it is not a very authoritative or academic work, but it is primarily trying to explain what is contemporary political theory, and briefly enumerated different the characteristics of different important issues and trends in contemporary political theory. There are references also in all the chapters, so if one wants to go for a deeper study, one can always find references for that. So I believe that this book will be very important and very useful for the young teachers and students and research scholars, and in general those who are interested in knowing something about what is happening around us in the political theory arena. Thank you.